on the Department of Air Force fiscal year 2021 budget request. Before us today to discuss the request are Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Dr. William Roper, and Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans and Programs, Lieutenant General David Naham. Did I pronounce that right? Okay, thank you. Thank you both for being here today. The bombers, tankers, and airlifters under our oversight form the critical backbone of our ability to project force and support operations around the world. With increasing age and readiness challenges, the current fleet is already strained in meeting key warfighting requirements. The Department of Air Force's budget request for 2021 proposes force structure cuts across these critical capabilities, retiring dozens of aircraft over the next 5 years, and asks to redirect a large share of that money towards modernization and advanced capabilities. The question for our subcommittee as we begin our work on the next NDAA is whether this budget request properly balances the investment in the future capabilities with the risk being assumed by giving up already strained capacity today. For example, the budget proposes to procure 15 new KC-46 tankers in 2021 while retiring 29 legacy tankers. At the same time, the Air Force plans to continue accepting new KC-46 even as the fix to ongoing problems with the remote visual system, a key element of refueling capabilities, is still being developed, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that this afternoon. Just last week, I had the opportunity to see the KC-46 program and the RVS system firsthand. That visit made clear to me that this is a fundamental hardware problem that must be resolved to make this system workable. I understand efforts are underway to establish a path towards resolving these issues, and I hope we will see a clear plan soon. While that process continues, however, the budget asks this committee to authorize retirement of tankers as the aircraft meant to replace them, to authorize the retirement of tankers as the aircraft meant to replace them cannot be flown operationally. Our mobility commanders are raising serious alarm about the critical gaps this will create in our aerial refueling requirements. This subcommittee has been and will continue to scrutinize whether the Air Force's stopgap plan is the right approach. Similarly, I am concerned that the Air Force continues to lack a plan for sustaining the tactical airlift capabilities of our Air National Guard. This committee has pursued a two-pronged approach on this important issue. First, directing congressionally directed investment in modernization efforts like upgraded avionics, safety-enhancing propellers, and high-performance engines. And second, pursuing congressionally directed procurement of new C-130Js. I say congressionally directed because it has been Congress, in many cases this subcommittee, who has led these efforts when the Air Force budgets have failed to do so. That appears to be the case again with a plan to replace 24 C-130H aircraft with 19 C-130Js in 2021 and no further plans to modernize or recapitalize the fleet beyond required electronics upgrades. This remains a top concern of the subcommittee and one that we hope will address in the 2021 defense authorization. With that, now I would like to welcome our on-time and highly qualified ranking member, Rob Whitman, for his opening remarks.
Well, Joe, thank you again. Thanks so much for your leadership, and I appreciate you yielding the floor, and I want to thank our two witnesses today for testifying before us. As we take a look at this budget request, it appears that this budget is only the beginning of an effort to address a great powers competition and that we have a long way to go. I'm supportive of many of the efforts to divest certain legacy aircraft and use that funding as a down payment on future requirements. In fact, I've been encouraging all the services to do this. However, I do remain concerned about two specific areas in the budget request, namely bombers and tankers. As to bombers, we have been on this journey for several years. Because of the nature of future conflict, bombers will be an increasingly valuable asset over shorter range capabilities to ensure the U.S. has persistent operations in a contested environment. Giving credit where credit is due, the B-21 Raider looks like a promising capability and is tracking towards a timely delivery. However, as to our existing bomber force structure, I continue to have concerns with our B-1 Lancer low mission capable rates, the recommendation not to modernize the B-2 defensive management system, and considerable uncertainty on the bomber roadmap. And I remain concerned about our ability to project long-range strikes. Concerning the recommendation to retire certain B-1 bombers and not modernize the B-2, I look forward to careful assessment of the budget request to ensure we retain adequate strike capability. The tanker force structure may be the most perplexing element in the budget request. With a recommendation to retire certain KC-135 and KC-10 aircraft and a continued delay in delivering capable KC-46A aircraft, I think that we need to make significant changes. I do not understand why the Air Force continues to accept deficient KC-46A tankers that are not mission capable. We may be years away from an adequate capability, and I want to give the Air Force credit for their tremendous efforts to make sure we get there. I think there's been a lot of progress that have been made, but we are still years away. Yet the Air Force appears ready to enter into a full-rate production of a deficient KC-46A aircraft and has requested an astounding 15 KC-46A aircraft in this budget request. If Senator John McCain were here today, I am very confident of what his response would be. Considering the multi-year effort to fix KC-46A, I think it is time to slow down ordering and delivery of deficient KC-46A aircraft and to retain adequate legacy tankers to ensure that we can provide adequate capability. It is not surprising that General Lyons, commander of U.S. Transportation Command, indicated last week that this budget request creates a capacity gap with significant impacts to combatant command daily competition in wartime missions and negatively impacts senior leader decision space for mobilization when confronted with a crisis. I agree with General Lyons and think it is time to reverse this dangerous trend. Again, I thank Chairman Courtney for his leadership and for having this important hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. And now, Dr. Roper, the floor is yours.
Chairman Courtney, Ranking Member Whitman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you, one, for holding this hearing today and for your interest in the future of the Air Force and for the support that you provide our systems and our airmen and their families. We're very excited to talk with you about the things that are positive in our budget, the things that we're doing to modernize, to get prepared for peer competition, the things that we're doing to speed up the acquisition system so we can compete long-term, and our ability to keep the force that fights today ready. We're very mindful of the time that we have for today's hearing, so with your permission, I'd like to have our statement read into the record, our written statement, and with that, we would like to go ahead and go to your questions, sir.
Great, no objection. So again, so for the record, it's 4:45 is the hard stop? Yeah, Dr. Roper, okay. Well, why don't we just in terms of, and I'm gonna ask just one question and we'll move along here. So, I mean, on the question of the KC-46, having, again, had a chance to visit just last week, and I know Mr. Norcross and Ms. Hartzler also were out in California as well, Washington State as well. Can you just kind of give an update in terms of just, the process of what the Air Force did in terms of its sort of deeper analysis in terms of using science and medicine and just sort of how that has affected the plan moving forward?
Mr. Chairman, it's been an interesting and really fascinating progress on KC-46 just from an intellectual standpoint. So as a scientist, I've really enjoyed learning that an RVS is much more complicated than just mere cameras. As a reminder, about 18 months ago, we were still arguing over pictures. We would have images that were washed out where you couldn't see the receptacle side by side with images where you could see the receptacle perfectly. And we didn't understand how to design an RVS, how to look at performance specifications and know it would work prior to making it. That's when we brought on scientists from the Air Force and for Boeing who are experts in human vision, who are experts in how humans interact with displays, and we really put the reins in their hands. We asked them, what are the basic technical characteristics that tell you a remote visual system will work, where you know that before you build it, and you can measure any system up to those standards to know that it will work in the field. When we accepted the first aircraft, we modified the contract. We shifted from the vague language of the firm fixed price contract, which was the original one, to 9 critical performance specifications. Over the last year, we have been looking at trying to, Boeing has been looking at trying to tweak the current design. Over the last 3 weeks, I've seen the team make more progress than they did during the year that preceded it. with the scientists really converging quickly on the designs that will pass. And though we have more work to do, the commitment that I have with Boeing is that science will lead the future of the program. We will be data-driven, we will be science-driven, and as long as we stay in that technical framework, I'm very confident of getting to an agreement quickly that will pass muster for the warfighter and for the taxpayer as well.
And again, just real quick, so the initial analysis, which again sort of just looked at, like you said, as the interaction between the human eye, nervous system, and the existing system that was there. I mean, what was, there was obviously an impact in terms of the airmen, and maybe you can just sort of describe what that was physiologically, and then I'll yield to Mr. Whitman.
Yes, sir. So the original contract doesn't call for a remote visual system. It just says deliver a tanker that can tank. The RVS was a design choice for Boeing. And I think early on, because Boeing had built past tankers with remote visual systems, they thought it would not be difficult. But it's much more complicated than meets the eye, pun intended. And some of the choices they made on previous tankers, they had happy accidents where mistakes canceled each other out, and they got better performance than we currently see. We are now at such a level of technical understanding that we understand how men and women will be affected differently, how old and younger operators will be affected differently, because age of eyes affects performance, distance of pupils affects performance. We now know terms like focus fixation mismatch and divergence and depth plane compression and curvature, things that were not parlance in the tanker a year and a half ago. These are the things that we measure to ensure that the tanker represents on the display the three-dimensional reality that is outside. So the scientists that understand that far better than I do, I've gotten smart because of them, they are bringing in designs and showing us which ones are capable of meeting a level of performance that can tank every aircraft and which ones can't. And when I say we've made more progress over the last 3 weeks than the year before, I don't think I've ever seen a program make this much progress this fast. And the thing I'll take as a takeaway from this is things are a lot better when you have technical people leading. You get to agreements faster. And so I'm excited for the future of the program as long as scientists and engineers continue to lead and we're data-driven in our decisions. I wish I could say more. We're still negotiating with Boeing, but we're making progress and we're trending in the right direction and trending quickly.
Thank you. Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Roper, I wanted to get a little bit deeper into KC-46A. Last month, Chief of Staff General Goldfein came and testified before us and said none of the timelines for the remote visioning system were going to be met. And based on Boeing's latest proposal, the timelines to get a final fix to the warfighter is going to slip to the right by 2 years. First of all, I wanted to get your thought on that, if you agree with General Goldfein's assessment. Second of all, with these deficiencies, is it wise to go to full rate production on KC-46A? And should we not take some kind of pause or at least reduce to the minimal acceptable level of delivery under the contract until we get these permanent fixes to both the hardware and software?
So, Ranking Member Whitman, with respect to the Chief's testimony, I have seen the change in the last 3 weeks. So I'll just say the pressure and encouragement that is coming in from senior leaders like General Goldfein, from members like yourself, and the interest that you take in going out and seeing things in the real world, which is very helpful for us, because when we're having a discussion and a hearing like this, we're discussing from a common frame of reference. All of that is helping us trend in the right direction. So give me a few more weeks to continue to work the details, but I'm excited about the future of KC-46 for the first time.
Okay.
With respect to acceptance rates, you're absolutely right. There's a certain number that Air Mobility Command needs to get operators trained, to get maintainers trained, to start standing up new bases that need to have some proficiency with the vehicles. And it is a tanker, but it's also a mobility asset and an aero medevac. So some number have use, and that's for the warfighter to decide. The thing we wrestle with in the current contract is that if we accept fewer than 15 per year, we incur a cost penalty, and 12 is the minimum that we can accept. Okay. So we were supposed to be accepting 3 per month. We have lessened that. We're at 2.2 on average, and at the end of calendar year 20, we plan to go down to 1.25. Okay. So sticking at that 15 so we don't incur a cost penalty. And so, what we're balancing is the original contract that awarded everything. So it was the EMD, it was all the production lots with pre-negotiated pricing. And if we fail to award, we lose that pricing. And so that's why we really want to get the RVS fixed as quickly as we can so that the fix cuts into the line. We can ramp up production, go to full rate, and be excited about the tanker that we have.
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about B-2 modernization. Last year when you were before the committee, you said this. You said, for programs like the B-2, we have to keep the ability to penetrate. We can't take risk there until the B-21 fields. If you look at the FY21 budget, we see that there is some risk because you recommend moving away from the B-2 defense management system and not fielding it after $1.9 billion of investment into that system. The question is do you still see the same risk that exists with having the variety of systems necessary to be able to penetrate? Do you believe that this $1.9 billion investment was the wrong investment, was not necessary, and where does that leave us today with having the ability to bridge that capability until we fully field the B-21?
And sir, I'll start out in this one, and then we'll get into some particulars in the DMSM. I'll probably turn to Dr. Roper for an assist on that. But first of all, on the bomber fleet, there's nothing more important to the Air Force. And if you look at what the bombers bring, no one else brings that. Our joint partners don't bring it. Our coalition partners don't bring it. And when you look at long-distance volumes of fires that you alluded to in your opening statement, that is the bomber force. Yeah. The future of the bomber force for the Air Force is in a B-21 and a heavily modified B-52. And that's what we're looking towards. And when you look at making that jump to great power competition, getting to that 2-bomber fleet in the future is very important for the Air Force and keeping those 2 programs on track. When you look at the B-1 and B-2, they're very important too because there's some capabilities we need in the interim until we get there. For the B-2 specifically, its ability to penetrate, as well as its nuclear strategic deterrence mission, and the B-1 and just pure volume of fires. Talking about the B-2 first, we need to keep the B-2. We need to keep it until we have a B-21 that is nuclear certified, and that's going to be about 10 years from now, and that we have a commitment in that platform. In terms of the DMSM, it is a program that was slowed. There were some difficulties in the program, and I'll let Dr. Roper comment on that as soon as I finish with this. But when we look at that, we actually have ways we think we can mitigate that. And what I would like to do is come back in a classified setting and talk more specifically about that, because I think there's ways we can save money and apply that to B-21 and B-52 modernization and mitigate that risk in the interim. The B-1 is trickier. One of the problems with the B-1 is we've used that airplane and overused it over many years, and it's broken in many ways. And I'll also let Dr. Roper comment on that because there's some engineering aspects of that I think are very important. When you look at the B-1s right now at Ellsworth and Dyess, and you look at the mission capable rates, and you look at the numbers of airplanes that are beyond service life and what it would take to recover those airplanes, going into this, when we looked at the B-1, we said there's probably some number of those that we probably should take offline so we can use the same number of maintainers to concentrate on the airplanes that are more easily recoverable, more efficient to recover to a flying status. We did some very deep analysis, and we think the number is 17, and that's what's in our president's budget. By taking the fleet down by 17 airplanes, that takes the worst actors offline and lets the maintainers now concentrate on the airplanes that have a better road to recovery. And we think by doing this, we'll get the mission capable rate to a more acceptable level. The intention now is to hold that B-1 level until that fleet shakes hands with the B-21, when the B-21 becomes operational. And we think that's a good path forward on the bomber to save some of the funds for great power competition while keeping some near-term capacity moving forward. And Dr. Roper, I'll turn it over to you for DMSM in particulars.
Yeah, DMSN. Yeah, too many acronyms in the Defense Department for me. Yeah. When we were first tackling that problem, and I've been with that team 3 times. I'm headed down to meet with them again tomorrow. I was hoping that what they had to do was the same thing we had to do on OCX, which is the ground control station for GPS that hit a brick wall and couldn't go further, or Air Operations Center 10.2. And it's a shift the entire department is doing, but we're really leading an aggressive charge in the Air Force, and that's shifting from waterfall software development, where you deliver code in huge chunks that are years apart, to a process that's called Agile or DevSecOps, which is really fast spirals. And it's something all of industry, defense industry, is struggling with, and it's just the way code exists in commercial industry. So for programs like OCX and then AOC 10.2, which became the Software Factory Kessel Run, so if you've been to that, it actually feels like you're in a software company. You learn the process, you write good code, you win. And so we hope that would be what we need to do for the B2. The B2 had something else, and so we experienced a 6 to 8 month slip just to get the Agile process in place. But unlike AOC 10.2, now Kessel Run, we're not deploying code to new computers. We're deploying them to old computers, and the runtime, the embedded systems on those computers are simply not known. And so developers at Northrop Grumman who write good code in their development environment take it out to the jet and it doesn't run. And it's not their fault, it's that there are nuances on the jet that were unknown, and now they have to debug them, they have to work regression testing. And that drove a lot more time because the upgrade is significant. It's a system of systems that have to work together. And the lesson we learn out of this is if we want to do a major modernization in future and deploy onto old computers, the embedded systems are going to eat our lunch. Right, the lesson we learned on B2 is a lesson we're going to learn every time. And as long as we're maintaining old systems, it's something that's going to bite us if we have to keep it relevant. The good news, and I know having to de-scope a program is not good news, but there is a lasting benefit from this, is we went out and tried to figure out how do we not have this happen again. And there's a technology that's very new. You may not have heard of this. It's called containerization or Kubernetes. It's an open source development technology. It's being driven by Google and other major companies, and it's amazing. And it solves the problem that we experienced on B2. And I won't bore you with the technical details, but in a nutshell, it ensures that code runs the same way bit for bit on any kind of computer. And to demonstrate it, we actually went from a development laptop to the F-16 recently with no steps in between, and code ran exactly the same way. So this containerization trend, which you can imagine makes sense for the Internet of Things, you want to deploy code to the world of connected things and have it run in a predictable way, is going to help solve a lot of our problems. Unfortunately, it was a technology that wasn't trending when this program began, and we've learned a lesson the hard way, but it's a lesson that I don't intend to learn again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Roper, General, good to have you here. As he mentioned, we were out in Washington to look at the KC-46. So a couple areas I want to just look at a little bit closer. Class 1 deficiencies, as I understand them. It's the tie-down system, which an approval for the fix has been made, correct? Second one is the boom, the stiffness, which comes back on us as a responsibility in working on that. And obviously, the 800-pound gorilla is the RVS system, which, as Joe had mentioned, is that we got a deep dive. The bad news is we had to do it. The good news is we now have the latest, the most up-to-date that we would not have if this was on its original schedule. So that's a good thing. I believe we're going to come to an accommodation that works for us shortly, and that's a relative term to where we're at, which is the good news. Would you explain to us, if we decide to delay the purchase of additional planes, in addition to the cost factor you're talking about, how does Boeing, once that new system for the visual is approved, how do we make that up if we're postponing the purchase of planes?
And sir, just so I understand, do you mean taking acceptances all the way to zero,
Yeah.
or taking them down to the minimum? So if we go below 12 per year, then we break the contract.
Right, the sheer numbers. And it's on Boeing's dime, right?
It is. So, sir, all the retrofitting, the designing, that's on Boeing's nickel. But one of the things that's been tough on KC-46 is because everything is wrapped up in a firm fixed price contract where the government doesn't get insight into design, we're not giving taskings, we're not approving things, it really puts the reins in the contractor's hands. I'm not saying that's a bad practice for everything, but for something unprecedented like an RVS that hasn't been done before, in hindsight, it's a very bad business model to work with industry. So given the money—
Boeing would agree with that.
I mean, given the billions that we're in, And the fact that we've got a plane that our pilots like flying, it's good for mobility, it's good for medevac, but we just have this bad RVS system. We've got to play this forward. And so I feel kind of like, I guess, a closer in baseball, that I'm inheriting a lot of runners, but we've got to get out of the inning. And we're closer to getting out of the inning than starting a new game.
And the production line is going to be much quicker in retrofitting that one piece than waiting to build the entire plane. And to Mr. Whitman's comment, I agree with that. It seems counterintuitive that you want to purchase a plane that's not ready, but that time to retrofit is much less.
Yes, sir. That's why we would like to go down to the minimum that preserves our airplanes and the pricing. As we come to resolution with Boeing on design, we would like whatever needs to be retrofit, if it can be put in on the production line before the whole fix. So those prudent things so that the retrofit can be done. And then, of course, there's an art to retrofit. Do we fly all the planes in, or do we do it as part of the maintenance cycle? Those are all things that are in the reins of Air Mobility Command to decide. But the thing I'm now feeling positive about is we're reaching agreement on what constitutes a working RVS in a way that involves numbers.
The retirement of the KC-135s and KC-10s. Consideration of not having capacity is going to be huge here. How are we mitigating that with the budget containing those cuts? And are you considering outside resources for refueling in order to make up for that? General.
Sir, as we bring on the KC-46 with the limited capability we have right now, and we start retiring some of our KC-135s and KC-10s, these are very difficult decisions, and certainly nothing we would want to do. We know that as we take air refuelers offline that we can use, we are incurring risk for the combatant commanders in current day operations. There's certainly a look towards the future of what we need our Air Force to look like in great power competition. Just like the bomber with 2-bomber fleet, we are going to be a future of a 2-tanker fleet, the KC-46 and a KC-135 moving forward. And there is some divestment that has to happen to make room in both money and people, and in some cases ramp space as we move forward. And so we're watching that very closely. We know as we let KC-135s and KC-10s go to the boneyard as we retire them, we know that we are incurring the risk because of the condition of the KC-46. And that's why we're trying to work very closely with the combatant commanders and the users for that near-term risk. I will say that with the KC-10 is probably more important that we actually keep that on schedule because of the manpower and the ramp space limitations. The KC-135, we have done some things. If you're familiar with Pease and North Carolina at Seymour Johnson, where we have active duty association, so active duty airmen in those guard and reserve units, we've actually are pulling those active association manpower out so we can actually put them in the broader KC-135 environment. That way we can transition Pease and Seymour Johnson to the KC-46 with their limited ability to perform the refueling mission and still use those airmen to keep some more KC-135s out of the boneyard. So we are doing some things to help mitigate the risk, but it is going to be a difficult discussion going forward. I will say, though, when we looked at this president's budget, we did have to balance risk across all portfolios. There were some things we did that were very uncomfortable. I would say, canceling one of our hypersonic initiatives, accepting less fighters than we would have liked. Certainly some of the munitions we weren't able to get after, and this certainly is indicative of that. And I think the last thing I'll say is that we've said when we go back to the Air Force, we need study, and 386 operational squadrons. We know that the Air Force we have right now is too small for for what's being asked of our Air Force from our nation. The size of the tanker fleet is certainly indicative of that, of an Air Force that is just not big enough right now to do all the missions that are being asked of it.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Chairman. General, you may have answered this question when you were talking to Mr. Whitman, but the bomber vector going from the B-1, B-2s to just the B-52s and the new B-21, looks like you're retiring older planes and you're retiring younger planes and keeping older planes flying for 100 years. Was that in your answer on the B-1s?
It wasn't, sir, and I'll tell you, and I'll let Dr. Roper comment on this as well.
Okay.
But what's interesting about the B-52 is These are old airplanes, but they're relatively young in terms of flying hours. You know, many of these airplanes sat a lot of nuclear alert through the Cold War and have relatively low hours on them in comparison. And so there is, and if you look at that, what we need a bomber to do, and what we can do with the B-52, with the civilian engine replacement program, the SERP, as well as the new radar and some of the new digital backbone, we're going to be able to do things with that airplane that we would not be able to do with a B-1 and B-2. And I'll let Dr. Roper comment on that as well.
Yes, thanks, General. I think Indiana Jones said it's not the years, it's the mileage, and it very much applies to airplanes. And the B-1 particularly has been an eye-opener for me because I've usually been a high-tech developer for most of my career, so coming into this Air Force job, you get a lot of sustainment, and I've learned a lot about it. But going through those first 5 tails with General Ray, where we realized that some of the bombers were much harder flown. They required much more aggressive inspections to keep them flying in operations, and that trying to maintain that level of operational availability was just a disproportionate tax on the fleet. And so that then started to look at, is there a break point that would allow us to retire a number of airplanes so that we could raise the readiness of the remaining fleet, because you're maintaining things that are easier to maintain.
Okay. Well, then, how's the re-engineering going on the B-52? Is it on schedule, on budget?
So, sir, I think going well. So this was one where we were able to start the program much earlier because of the authorities, rapid prototyping authorities that Congress granted us. So perfect in the wheelhouse for that, because the first step in the program is using digital engineering to start representing the engine mating with the aircraft. We'll release the RFP for the engines this year. So you got Boeing designing the power pod. We'll get the engine vendors mating their digital twin with Boeing's. And then the step after that is the physical prototype. Only after that will we move to a formal major program. The prototyping helps us de-risk going into it.
Right.
So this is just a great case of fly before you buy, but in this case, flying for us is the digital twinning. It's playing that same de-risking role.
All right. And then where are you going to base the B-21, and when will we know that?
The B-21 right now, sir, Ellsworth, Dyess, and Ellsworth, Whiteman, and Dyess, where your currently B-1 and B-2 fleet are.
So you'll split them on all 3?
There will be split between 3
Okay.
bases, yes, sir.
And then for the uninitiated, I was in the Army, not the Air Force. The second category problem with the KC-46 is the telescoping can thing. I understand the RVS being brand spanking new, but for those who are uninitiated, why is it that we've got a problem with a telescoping can that isn't a problem in other booms that we've been doing for 50 years?
Yes, sir. It's a good question. So, you know, the tanker fleet we have now is old. So, you know, it works. It's been built for the legacy fleet. This is the first time we've done a new boom in a while. Boeing designed the boom for the international standards called 7191, where other tankers are built for. It has, I think, 1,400 pounds of pressure, and that's good for almost every airplane we have, except the A-10. And so the A-10 needs something that's closer to 600 to 800. And so we needed to deviate from that international standard for the A-10. And so that's where the requirements change came from us. And
So the current tanker fleet can refuel the A-10?
It can.
And the old booms?
It can. And what I wish had been known is that the current tanker fleet, because it's not new, was not designed to that international standard. It's designed below it. So what has to be done is just change out the actuator in the boom so that it's softer for the push.
Okay, and that will get done before the RVS is fixed?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's straightforward engineering.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back.
Great, thanks, Mike. Mr. Gallagher.
What a surprise. You've lost your reinforcements on the left. So I want to pull the string on the B-21 issue a little bit if we can. So as I understand it, the Air Force plans to purchase no less than 100 B-21s, correct? So then assuming that B-21 program that will arrive on schedule with a projected delivery date of mid-2020s, I guess the question is, what number of operational B-21s will be sufficient to retire the B-1B and the B-2A bombers, and approximately what year will that be? I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, you know, as we look forward, as you look at the B-1 fleet, and a fleet now, which is going to be less, of 44 aircraft moving straight across. These are the decisions. I would say there's probably a little bit of unknown in that because the B1 right now, the B21 right now is on track and doing very well, but there will be some challenges going forward. So we know that we're going to the B1 fleet and how we divest now. Just like we do at any base with any airplane, there will be as the first B-21s goes into the first site, there will be a transition period where that base will bring down their B-1s and will bring in their B-21s. There will be a transition, just like the F-35s that are happening at Burlington right now. The F-16s have gone away. The F-35s are showing up. The crews are retraining, and all that's going to happen. So there will be a transition, and that will go base to base. So you'll have the first base. We'll start somewhere, like you said, mid to 26, 27 timeframe when the first aircraft show up. After that transition, then you go to the next base and then the next. So there will be an overlap. When that exact last B-1 flies out and goes to the boneyard, I think there's a window that's probably somewhere in the late 20s, early 30s, and I think there's enough variable right now. I probably couldn't pin it down just yet. Is there anything to add on that?
Fair enough, and I think the concern would be if B-21 gets delayed, right? Are we then going to have to invest a little bit in B-1 in order to preserve long-range strike?
Absolutely, sir, and we are. In the airframes that are left, the 44 airplanes that are left, we are investing in making sure that they have the airframe and the avionics they need to carry that long-range strike through the 20s, and because we're going to have to do that.
We heard yesterday, or I'm losing track of time. We've had so many of these hearings. I think it was yesterday. Secretary Esper told us that DoD is currently updating op plans in light of the National Defense Strategy. For example, the first post-NDS Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment is currently under review by the Secretary, and it's likely the fleet will not see significant changes from its will see significant changes from its pre-NDS Force Structure Assessment. Given that the planned buy of 100 B-21s was established prior to the NDS, does the Air Force have any plans to revisit that number in light of the NDS's focus on higher-end threats and great power competition with China in particular? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think the thing we're doing with China and Russia in our face, we're relooking at everything. I mean, so the thing I'm really proud of the Air Force and now Space Force for doing this last year was really taking a hard look at what it takes to compete and to win against an adversary like China. I mean, that was basically my job when I was in OSD. It's wonderful being part of a whole service doing it. And, you know, roles and missions when you're fighting a peer are going to be different than fighting a non-peer or a low-end violent extremist. So I think the things before the NDS, all of them are on the table to be relooked at.
Sure. And I'll say that the number 100 was always a minimum. And if you look at the Air Force we need studying the 386 operational squadrons, that number is the number of total bombers is over 200, and that would be, if you look at the number of B-52s we'll have left, that'll be a larger fleet than 100 on the B-21.
And it's very clear range and capacity really matter in the future fight.
Dr. Roper, I was mentioning earlier, I ran into you in Silicon Valley a little bit ago. If you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about your efforts of outreach there and how they've borne fruit in terms of, you know, reaching out beyond defense primes and some of those relationships that you built in Silicon Valley.
No, I really appreciate the question. This is some of the most fun work that I'm doing right now in the Air Force. And the thing we're up against is we're only 20% of R&D. So 20% of this nation's R&D is in defense. And so the opportunities are increasingly in commercial tech. And of course, you know, you're well aware the Defense Department has not made great inroads with Silicon Valley and commercial startups. And the thing that's been fun is trying to reset the relationship by showing that we can speed up our purchasing system, that we can use our military market to aid commercialization. So last year we did 15 events that we call pitch days, where we can have a startup pitch to us and we can put them on contract that same day and pay them that same day, which is night and day difference based on the defense procurement system of the past. That's gone a long way to opening up the doors with private investors and venture capitalists who now view our, quote, investment arm, the one that's making early stage contracts with startups, viewing it as an early market delineator. And so we brought hundreds of millions into Air Force programs just from VCs saying, well, that company's on contract with the Air Force. They've got a chance of commercializing using the Air Force market. I probably need in. this is the year we're going to try to go big and go at scale. But the valuable trend I'm seeing is the way that China is engaging in Hong Kong is opening up a window of opportunity. And startups and investors are starting to view taking Chinese money differently than they did in the past. And now is the perfect time for the military to come in as an investment partner of choice, because we're not owning equity, right? And we're a different market than the commercial one. We can pay a higher price point, and we don't need things in the same quantity. So right now, rather than startup or a scale-up thinking, working with defense is hard and slow, I hope that they think in future that's the natural first step.
Thank you. I'm way out of time.
Thank you. So I guess Mr. Kelly was here when the gavel came down just before Vicki, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, our acquisition program across all four services, DOD, I'm a lawyer by profession, but I wouldn't practice contract law because I don't know what I'm doing. And we seem to think that fighter jockeys or that great infantry generals are going to be great acquisition guys to write these contracts. We get taken to task on these things, and we got to stop that. They shouldn't be able to, you know, it makes no sense that we have to take 12 planes or we have to pay a penalty, yet we have to pay for planes that don't meet the requirements that we asked for, and there is no penalty. That makes we've got to get professional lawyers. We contract a lot in the military. Maybe we need to contract some good contract lawyers to do acquisition. And that's just a comment, I'll leave that. But I want to get into, I recently flew into Iraq on an Illinois National Guard C-130. It was not the J model. I was also in Rhoda a few days later, and there was a C-17 Mississippi National Guard tail sitting there. I say all that to say the current distribution of older C-130Hs and the newer 130Js seems unbalanced throughout the total force. Air National Guard and Air Reserve C-130 squadrons comprise 76% of the Air Force's C-130 fleet, but only 15% of reserve component units are flying the modern C-130Js. However, every active duty C-130 squadron, 100% are fortunate to fly the C-130Js. What are your plans to correct this imbalance and make C-130 recapitalization and modernization proportional and concurrent as recommended by the 2014 National Commission on the Structure of Air Force?
I think that's mine, sir. Sir, C-130s first of all, thanks for the question. C-130s is a tough topic. We ask a lot of that community. They're incredible what they do. The whole tactical airlift community, just amazing. We have about 300 C-130s in the fleet right now. You're right, the C-130Hs are all in the Guard and Reserve. And as we look through this year, we actually have an exciting year because this year, based on the congressional gifts, and we thank you very much on the C-130Js, this year we're going to announce 3 new locations that are currently flying C-130Hs to transition to the C-130Js. 2 of those were previously planned. One of them is kind of a new one because we were going to transition Martin State out of the A-10 into a C-130J, and because of some other moves we're doing with the A-10 right now, we're actually going to leave Martin State in the A-10, and we're going to take those C-130Js and turn those into another C-130H unit. So we are transitioning some units. For the C-130Hs that are left, the units that are left in the C-130H, we are actively upgrading those aircraft with obviously the safety of flight with the center wing box, as well as AMP-1 for the compliance, AMP-2 for the modernized cockpit, and then in some cases the 3.5 motor and the MP2000 propeller system. So we are very.
Let me, and that's a good answer, but I got one more question, and it kind of fits into the same thing, so you can kind of finish. But despite Air Force plans to continue utilizing the C-130 for at least 20 more years, the department has seen fit not to request funds for C-130H modernization or new C-130Js for the Guard and Reserve. I realize reprogramming happened at the OSD level and not your level, but what's the operational risk incurred by the recent programming of funds intended for new C-130J aircraft for the Air National Guard?
Sir, in terms of the additional C-130Js, I don't believe there's going to be an operational impact, although we have to look and see how that's going to impact the units that we're going to be transitioning into the J. And we're working through those numbers right now. The tactical airlift community, I think we are actually on a good road right now between the C-130Js, the upgrades of the C-130Js, and the modernization of C-130Hs. I think we actually have a good laydown of what we want to do with the C-130 community. We do think there's room to reduce some of the C-130s, and you'll see that in our budget. And what we're doing, we're working very closely with the Guard and Reserve, looking at units that are currently flying C-130Hs and seeing what other flying missions we need to bring into for a modern Air Force. And we're working unit by unit to make sure we actually have a good fit. And that's how the Martin State.
And I'm going to reclaim the last 20 seconds, but I want to be real. You know, we ask a whole lot of our Guard and Reserve units. And they, in strategic air, and C-17s and C-130s and KC-135s and KC-46s, and we're asked to do the missions on old equipment over and over again, and we provide the majority of the fours, but we always seem to make them second-class citizens when it comes to fielding. And we don't need to do that. We need to make sure our airmen, whether they're Guard, Reserve, or active component, when they deploy downrange and do missions, we ought to have the best. And I just ask that we pay attention to that, and because it seems like the C-130Js that were scheduled are now cut out, which means they'll probably never get those because they were told to wait and then we'll field you, and now they're being told, well, we're not going to field you. And so I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, General. Ms. Hart, sir.
Well, thank you. I just want to foot stomp what my colleague just said about the C-130s. Of course, Missouri has one of those units there at Rosecrans, so just wanted to put that on your radar for your consideration of the Js as you're looking at another place there, because this divesting of the Hs could impact this unit potentially. And so I have a few questions. Will the C-130Hs that have already received new engines and propellers remain in service?
Ma'am, that'll be the intention. What we'll look at is if we do divest C-130H units, we will obviously divest the oldest aircraft that are not modified, and we'll make sure the airplanes that have all the upgrades and have that life left, 10, 15, 20 years life left, those are the ones we will keep moving forward.
Sounds good. You touched on this a little bit, but the question about what's the recapitalization or modernization plan for the entire C-130 fleet. Can you kind of summarize that again, and when will the Air Force release a force structure plan?
Well, right now, the C-130Hs, we do think we can reduce the C-130Hs based on, as we balance risk across all portfolios. We know that the units that are flying C-130Hs right now, those airmen that's where we make sure if we're going to reduce C-130Hs, what mission are we going to bring into those locations? And that's why we're actually going unit by unit, seeing is there a better fit. And actually, we found leaving Martin State in the A-10, what you're going to see in the 22 budget looking forward, we're actually going to we'll work with Congress on a couple of their locations. We think we can bring different flying missions into those locations as we reduce the C-130H fleet to the size we think that balance risks across portfolio.
Will bases currently operating the C-130Hs receive the Js?
Right. This year, as we go through the strategic basing process, we're going to introduce 3 locations, and we're going to use the entire C-130H enterprise to look at, and we'll score those appropriately and work very closely with your committee.
But beyond those this year, like next year, are you going to be adding Js where Hs are?
Well, right now we have the Js that we received based on congressional ads over the last few years. Those are the ones we're going to be moving into the H. In terms of the other units, without congressional ads, the plan is to take the C-130Hs and upgrade those into the
great.
AMP-1 and AMP-2.
2.5 minutes left, so want to get to the B-2. We've had a lot of good discussion. Appreciate the questions already asked. Appreciate the information already presented. Lots changed in a year, and I'm trying to digest it myself, because at this hearing a year ago, I asked you, Dr. Roper, if the Air Force was committed to the DMSM program, and you answered in the affirmative. And now we're looking at a proposal from you all to de-scope it, and I've received the classified briefing on that, so I understand why the decision was made, but unfortunately between the cancellation of the DMSM and the previous cancellation of the B-2 Advanced Extremely High Frequency Satellite Communications Program, that just kind of gives a heartburn, raises red flags regarding the Air Force's commitment to modernizing the B-2. So can you, in the testimony, you shared some of the modernization that you are committed to this year, but I was wondering, just from your own words, can you kind of summarize some of the modernization that this president's budget is still including for this year?
Sure. Representative Hartzler, aside from the de-scoping of DMS, there's the flexible strike upgrade, there's the movement to M-code, the military GPS unit upgrade, the common VLF receiver, Mode 5, Mode S, the crash survivable memory unit, and the radar-aided targeting system. So all of those, JASM integration, signature and LO maintenance and improvements, all of those are still funded. And
Right.
you know, I know you're short on time.
Sure, sure. So I want to go back to the cancellation last year, the Advanced Extremely High Frequency Satellite Communications Program, because you are funding at $215 million, that same system on the B-52. So do we need that on the B-2, and how come you don't think it's necessary there?
I would say on the, in terms of the B2 versus, the B2, obviously, we're committed to the B2 until the B21 can replace it, because we have to have the B2 and what that capability brings, and the upgrades Dr. Roper referred to. In terms of capability in the B52 and long-term upgrades, remember, the B52, like the B21, is the long-term solutions for our bomber force. We want to make sure that we're continuing to upgrade the B52 moving forward.
You just feel like it's not necessary until the B-21 comes on board? It's too expensive for the amount of time it would take? Is that what you're basically determining?
Technology.
Yes, based on how well the B-21 is doing, yes. If the B-21 were to slip, and right now there's no reason to believe that it will, then I think we would reassess modernizing for the B-2. Like I said, it has to be our penetrating bomber until the B-21 is ready to replace it.
And I appreciate the chair's indulgence. Just for one quick question, if you could, for the record, get back with me. What did we get for our $1.9 billion for DMSM that now we're descoping? So I'd like to know what we got for our money. Thank you.
It's a very good question. So again, I think we've had actually a pretty efficient hearing here, covered a lot of topics. I want to again thank both the witnesses. I actually just have one other follow-up along the same lines as Congressman Kelly and Congresswoman Hartzler, which is again on the C-130s. Again, it seems like it always falls in our lap to do the plus up for the MP2000 propeller enhancements. Again, I think a lot of us feel very strongly that based on other incidents that have happened in the Navy's C-130 fleet where you had loss of life because of propeller malfunction, that this really is really a safety issue. And it's sort of still a mystery to me why this is not really almost a program of record for the Air Force in terms of just doing what the Navy did, which is just to go out and wholesale do this upgrade and enhancement. So I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Sir, as we look at the MP2000, and obviously we like the performance enhancement of the MP2000. For the existing propeller on the C-130H fleet, though, there is a risk to that, but we are mitigating that risk through our maintenance action and our increased inspections. And I'll let Dr. Roper comment on that, because there's some things we're doing with that propeller to make sure that we do mitigate that risk correctly. Would we like to see MP2000s and 3.5 motors across the fleet? Yes. But it goes on to how we're balancing the money we have to make sure we're balancing risk across all portfolios in terms of how we're modernizing. And right now, making sure the few MP2000s we have gotten, we prioritize those into the fleets that absolutely need the enhanced performance, the LC-130s on skis, the units in Wyoming and Nevada that fight fires, and prioritizing those for upgrade. As we look across the fleet, when we see the C-130Hs we certainly want to look at what we can afford to put onto these C-130Hs, because we would like to have the enhanced performance on all of them. But in the meantime, we're pretty confident that we have mitigated the risk in the existing propeller housing. And sir, I'll let you comment on that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the very unfortunate incident, and again, our prayers go out to those families. put a focus on how we do maintenance on the legacy propellers, and two things were discovered: that there was a manufacturing change in the pre-1971 54H60 propellers that have now been pulled out of the fleet, and that we really needed to change inspection practices to go after corrosion and intergranular cracks more aggressively. So those inspection procedures have now been implemented across the Air Force, and I'm confident that they're sufficient to keep the legacy propeller working. To General Nahum's point, having a higher performing propeller would be fantastic. But the budget we built, I mean, we took high priority efforts like our 2 hypersonics programs and had to cancel one because we were simply trying to balance risk across missions. So we made tough choices. I think in a different budget environment where there was more cash to go around, I think we would look at the propellers differently, but this was a risk balancing case, and if we could make the existing system, if we could sustain it safely and reliably for mission, then we had to go with that to get more modernization in for new systems.
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, I don't question your concern, about this, the issue in terms of, the risk that we're talking about. But, again, I think Mr. Kelly did a nice job of sort of describing the workload, that this fleet is carrying. And I think a lot of us are concerned that we really want to err on the side of safety. So anyway, I'm sure we'll continue that discussion. Mr. Whitman, do you have any other questions, members? Again, thank you both. Really, it was very, very solid testimony and very helpful as we move towards the mark. And with that, we'll close the hearing. Thanks, Joe. Yep.